in the pristine glass tower of Millenbrook Enterprises, where every second was monetized and every emotion carefully edited out, Nathan Caldwell was known as the man who never stopped. At 46 he was the CEO everyone admired or feared. His calendar was booked 3 months in advance, and his decisions could make or break companies with a single signature. So when he collapsed during a routine quarterly meeting mid-sippings, no warning, everyone froze. Time seemed to slow as his assistant, Mia, screamed for help. Papers scattered. A junior analyst dropped their coffee. The head of PR instinctively reached for his phone, uncertain whether to dial 911 or prepare a press release. Nathan lay on the polished floor, motionless. By the time paramedics arrived, a quiet tension had settled over the room. Nobody dared whisper what everyone was thinking. Had stress finally caught up with him? The ambulance ride was brief, but what happened after? No one could have predicted. Nathan came to under the harsh lights of a downtown clinic, not the elite, private hospital he usually donated to. He blinked against the brightness and tried to sit up, but a firm, steady hand gently kept him down. And then he heard the voice, "Don't move too fast. You hit your head when you went down." That voice. Something about it calm, grounded, familiar in a way that tugged at something deep within him. Nathan turned his head slightly, and there, standing over him, wearing a faded white coat and a stethoscope with worn tubing, was a man he hadn't seen in years. A man he'd once walked past on the street without sparing a second glance. A man who used to be homeless. Nathan's dry lips parted. "You?" The man gave a slight, almost ironic smile. "Yeah, me, Dr. Eli Monroe." Nathan blinked, stunned, not because he was looking at a doctor but because he was looking at a ghost from his past. A man he once ignored on the cold steps outside his building. A man who used to ask for change. A man who now held his life in his hands. Before we continue, have you ever seen someone you once overlooked rise beyond anything you imagined? Drop your thoughts below, and if this story already has you curious, don't forget to subscribe, because what comes next changes everything. Nathan couldn't tear his eyes away from the man standing over him. It wasn't just the shock of seeing Eli again, it was the whiplash of memory, colliding with the sterile white walls and the quiet hum of medical machinery. Years ago, Eli Monroe had been just another shadow on the sidewalk to Nathan, a thin figure bundled in layers, stationed at the edge of the corporate district, holding a cardboard sign that read, "Former med student, just need one more chance." Nathan remembered walking past him dozens of times, sometimes with his head down, sometimes making eye contact, never stopping. And yet, here Eli was, not begging but saving. Nathan sat up slowly, his head spinning not just from the fainting, but from the truth he now faced. "You're a doctor?" he asked, as if saying it out loud might make it less surreal. Eli gave a small nod, checking Nathan's pulse with surprising gentleness. "I was a doctor before the streets, too. But yeah, board certified, emergency med, been here for the last 6 years." Nathan looked around. The clinic wasn't fancy old tiles, buzzing lights, scuffed counters, but it was clean, and it felt safe, more human than the polished, glassy world he had just left. But how? Nathan's voice trailed off. He didn't even know what question to ask. How did you go from street corners to stethoscopes? From sleeping on concrete to standing in a white coat over me? Eli chuckled softly. "That's a long story. One I'll tell if you stick around long enough." Nathan managed a tired smirk. Wasn't planning to faint again anytime soon. Eli stepped back, jotting notes onto a chart. Stress-induced hypotension, mild dehydration, nothing too serious, but it's a sign. You've been pushing yourself too hard. "When was your last full meal?" Nathan hesitated. "I don't remember." "That's the problem," Eli said. "You've forgotten what taking care of yourself even looks like." The words hit deeper than Nathan expected. "I run a billion-dollar company," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "And yet, here you are," Eli replied, setting the clipboard down, "lying on a cot in a free clinic. Maybe that company can survive one day without you." Nathan exhaled. No one talked to him like that. Not his board, not his investors, not even Mia, his assistant, who practically ran his life. But Eli wasn't intimidated by his title. He didn't care about the suits or the money. And somehow, Nathan respected him more for it. "So," Nathan said after a moment, "what happened? How'd you go from begging for change to running this place?" Eli leaned back against the counter, crossing his arms. Someone gave me a second chance. A social worker believed me, pushed me to finish my licensing again. I slept in shelters, worked nights, studied during the day, slowly rebuilt what I lost. Took years, but I got here. Nathan stared at him. You remember me? Eli gave a half smile. You used to walk by every Thursday morning with that same navy coat and a look like you were 5 seconds from firing someone. Nathan swallowed, suddenly embarrassed. I never stopped to talk, he said quietly. No, but you did look, and that was more than most. The silence between them settled into something strange like the start of an apology. Neither knew how to say dot. Nathan looked down at his trembling hands. I think I forgot how to breathe. Well, Eli replied, walking to the door. You're in the right place to start remembering. And with that, he left Nathan alone with nothing but the ticking clock, a racing heart, and the question echoing in his mind. Why am I the one being saved? By someone I left behind. Nathan sat on the clinic cot for a long time after Eli left. The room he should have been reaching for his phone, checking emails, texting Mia to reschedule the afternoon. But instead, he just stared at his own hands, still faintly shaking. How had it come to this? He was Nathan Caldwell, CEO, strategist, empire builder. He'd climbed every rung of the ladder without slipping once. But now, in the quiet of a place, where no one called him sir, he felt unmoored. The door creaked open, and a nurse entered, young, warm-eyed, with a clipboard and an easy smile. Mr. Caldwell, Dr. Monroe asked me to give you this. She handed him a sheet of paper, a follow-up schedule, a list of lab results, and a counseling referral. Nathan blinked. I think there's a mistake, he said. This says I should consider stress therapy. The nurse nodded, still smiling. Dr. Monroe includes that for most of our executive patients, we're not exactly a luxury clinic, she explained, but we see a lot of high-functioning professionals who've burned the candle from both ends. You'd be surprised how many CEOs faint right out of their power suits. Her tone wasn't mocking, it was understanding, and somehow, that made Nathan feel even more exposed. He took the paper, folded it once, and tucked it into his inside jacket pocket. Thanks. As the nurse left, he glanced around again. A faint hum of chatter came from the hallway, people laughing, staff calling each other by first name, the smell of cheap coffee floating from the break room. It felt alive here. Not efficient, not perfect, but real. And that scared him more than he cared to admit. He finally stood, straightened his collar, and stepped out into the corridor. The staff moved like clockwork, but not with the frantic urgency of Millenbrook. Here, things were done with care, not calculation. Back on your feet, Eli's voice called out from down the hall. Nathan turned to see him standing beside a woman in a wheelchair, gently adjusting her scarf. You're free to go, Eli said as he approached, but I'd recommend at least one follow-up. Also, he handed Nathan a bottle of electrolyte tablets. Try drinking water, not just espresso. Nathan chuckled softly. You always this hands-on. Eli shrugged. We don't have many hands to spare. Everyone here pitches in. Nathan glanced down the hallway again. You run this whole place. Director, technically, but we operate more like a family. Most of us have been on the other side of the system. Makes us pay attention differently. Nathan hesitated before asking the question that had been gnawing at him. Do you ever regret it? Leaving that world behind? Eli tilted his head. You mean the corporate world? Nathan nodded. Eli didn't answer right away. I lost everything once, my license, my home, my identity. And when I got a second chance, I realized I didn't want the same things anymore. Nathan said nothing, but he heard it. Something heavy shifted in his chest, like a hinge opening on a door he hadn't touched in years. Listen, Eli continued. You're not the first person to fall in this city, but you might be one of the rare few who can actually grow from it if you let yourself. There was no judgment in Eli's voice, just truth. Nathan exhaled slowly. What if I don't know how? Eli looked at him for a moment, then smiled gently. That's why we're here. Nathan nodded, almost imperceptibly, then turned, walked down the hallway, and out into the grey city afternoon. The wind hit his face harder than he expected. It didn't wake him, it reminded him. He pulled out the folded paper from his pocket, unfolded it, and stared at the counseling referral. He didn't throw it away. For the first time in years, he let the calendar wait. Nathan sat in the back of his car with the tinted windows rolled up, the city blurring past in streaks of grey and neon. But his mind wasn't in the traffic or the meetings he was supposed to reschedule. It was stuck in that clinic, with peeling paint and quiet laughter, and with a man who had once slept on sidewalks, Dr. Eli Monroe. The name echoed through Nathan's memory like a thread he hadn't realized had been woven through his life. He remembered that exact spot outside his office, years ago, where Eli had sat on a piece of cardboard, a broken stethoscope looped around his neck like a ghost of who he'd been. Nathan had passed him more times than he could count. Once, he even paused. Their eyes met, but Nathan, holding a leather briefcase and a 4-shot espresso, had walked away. Back then, it didn't feel cruel. It just felt normal. Now, it didn't. That evening, Nathan returned to his penthouse floor-to-ceiling windows, curated silence, and the eerie stillness of someone who'd built everything, except a life. He placed the referral sheet on the kitchen counter. It sat there like a dare. Then, for reasons he couldn't explain, he sat down at his desk and opened a new tab on his laptop. He typed in Eli Monroe and hit enter. At first, there was nothing. No LinkedIn, no medical board press releases. But buried 3 pages deep into the search was a local news clip from 7 years ago. A young reporter stood outside a city-run shelter. The headline read, "Once homeless med student fights for his license back." Nathan clicked. The video was grainy, but unmistakable. Eli, wearing an oversized coat and clutching a folder of documents, stood beside a legal advocate. His voice was softer, more uncertain than it was now, but his words were clear. "I made mistakes. I got sick. I lost everything. But I'm not broken. I just need a path back." The screen flickered to a cutaway of his cardboard sign, the same one Nathan had seen 100 times, and something cracked open in Nathan's chest. Guilt, admiration, maybe both. He closed the laptop and stared out the window at the city he'd spent his life trying to conquer. For what? For quarterly numbers and investor applause. For recognition from people who didn't know him. For meetings so packed that his heart gave out before he even noticed it was breaking. That night, he didn't open his inbox. He didn't check stock reports. He sat in his silence. And he remembered something Eli had said. "You're not the first person to fall, but you might be one of the rare few who can grow from it, if you let yourself." The next morning, Nathan stood in front of the same clinic. No suit, no driver, just him, holding the referral sheet in one hand and his pride in the other. Inside, the front desk receptionist barely glanced up. "Name, Nathan Caldwell. I think I'm here to talk to someone." She nodded and handed him a clipboard. "Fill this out. You'll be with Lisa in 15 minutes. He took the pen and hesitated. Then he wrote his name down, neatly, honestly. When he looked up, Eli was passing through the hall, speaking with a nurse. Their eyes met. Eli gave him a small nod, not one of surprise but of quiet approval, and Nathan felt something he hadn't felt in years, relief, not because he was fixed, but because for the first time he had admitted he was broken, and someone was still looking at him, like he mattered anyway. We're halfway through. Nathan faces something he's avoided for years, and what happens next might surprise you. If this story speaks to something inside you, let us know in the comments. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe, because the turning point is coming. The counselor's office wasn't what Nathan expected. There were no leather armchairs, no degrees framed in gold trim, just a modest room with a soft grey couch, 2 chairs, and a small window with a half-broken blind. The woman sitting across from him introduced herself simply. "Lisa, licensed clinical social worker. Nothing fancy. It can just be Nathan here." That startled him more than it should have. Nathan sat with his arms folded at first. Years of boardroom conditioning had trained him to control every narrative, including his own. But after the first 10 minutes of silence, Lisa offered him a yellow notepad and said, "Write something. Anything. Doesn't need to make sense. Doesn't need to be for anyone. Just write." He stared at the blank page for a long time. His hand hovered over it, and then slowly he wrote, "To Dad, I don't remember the last time you said you were proud of me." The pen moved faster than his thoughts. Words spilled out like they'd been waiting years to be heard. Apologies, questions, anger, longing. He wrote about the night he got promoted and called his father, only to hear disappointment in the silence. He wrote about the years he tried to impress someone who wasn't even watching. He wrote about the fear of slowing down, of becoming irrelevant, of being alone, and then he stopped. The room was quiet, except for the faint ticking of a wall clock. Lisa didn't reach for the paper. She didn't even look at it. She just said, "That's a start." Nathan stared at what he'd written. The ink slightly smudged from his thumb. He hadn't realized he was gripping the pen so tightly, or that his chest felt lighter. Later that day, as he stepped back into the hallway, he spotted Eli coming out of a supply closet, holding a stack of donated scrubs. "You stayed," Eli said, raising an eyebrow. "I did." Eli handed the scrubs to a nurse, then leaned against the wall. "How was it?" Nathan exhaled. "We didn't talk much, but I think I yelled at my dad on paper." Eli gave a small smile. "That counts." They stood there in silence for a moment. Not awkward, just honest. "You know," Nathan said carefully, "you could have walked away from all of it. From the system that failed you. From people like me who ignored you." Eli met his gaze. "Steady." "I wanted to, for a long time. But then I realized, if I walked away, I'd let it win. The shame, the anger, the silence. I didn't want that to be the end of my story." Nathan nodded slowly. "That hit somewhere deep." Eli continued. "I don't need revenge. I just need to make this place exist for people who think they've run out of chances." Nathan looked down the hallway toward the waiting room. It was full people of every background, every story. Some looked tired, some hopeful. Most just human. And for the first time in years, Nathan felt human, too. Before he left, he walked past the front desk, paused, and asked the receptionist a question that surprised even himself. "Do you take corporate donations?" She blinked. Yes. There's a small fund." "Why?" Nathan smiled faintly. "No reason." He didn't tell her yet, but he would, soon. What do you think Nathan should do next? Drop your thoughts below. And if this story is starting to tug at something inside you, hit that like button. We're just getting to the heart of it. 3 days later, Nathan was back in his corner office at Millenbrook Tower. The windows overlooked the city like a throne room watching over its subjects. Everything was back to normal, or at least, pretending to be. The meetings resumed. The calendar overflowed. Mia had rearranged his schedule to avoid further health incidents, as the board called it, an elegant way of saying collapse without causing panic. But Nathan felt different. He didn't yell when a presentation was late. He didn't cut off a junior staffer mid-sentence. He didn't even flinch when the quarterly numbers came in flat. What shook him most was this. He didn't care about winning quite the same way anymore. That afternoon, while reviewing acquisition proposals, he paused mid-scroll and opened a browser tab. He searched again for the clinic's donation page. It was outdated, with a glitchy form and no social media presence. But the mission statement hit hard. "We believe no human being is beyond healing and no story is ever truly finished." He stared at the words for a long time, then picked up the phone. "Janice," he said to the company's legal advisor, "I want to set up a private endowment, quietly, under a different name." "Sure," she replied. "Which organization?" He hesitated. "It's a medical clinic downtown, low-income care, but I want the support to be long-term. No press release, just steady oxygen." Janice paused. "Oxygen? That's what they do," he said. "They help people breathe again." That night, he found himself sitting on the edge of his bed, holding the letter he'd written in Lisa's office. It was wrinkled now, folded and unfolded a dozen times, still unsent, but somehow it had already changed him. He picked up his phone and texted Mia. "Cancel tomorrow's investor briefing. Reschedule for next week. Need to be somewhere important." No explanation, no follow-up. The next morning Nathan stood once again in front of the faded blue awning of the clinic. This time, he wasn't a patient. He wasn't there to be saved. He was there to offer something back. Inside, the receptionist blinked in surprise when she saw him. "Back so soon?" she asked, smiling. He nodded. "I have a check for your director, and an idea." Moments later, Eli entered the front office. His eyes widened slightly when he saw the envelope in Nathan's hand. "You didn't have to do that," Eli said. "I know," Nathan replied, "but I wanted to." Eli opened the envelope. Inside wasn't just a donation, it was a proposal. Funding for renovation, a mental health wing, salaries for additional staff, all anonymous, all structured to last. "This is..." Eli looked up, at a rare loss for words. "This could change everything." Nathan exhaled. "It already changed me." They stood there in a silence built not on awkwardness but on recognition. Eli looked at him carefully. Why now? Nathan met his gaze. Because I spent 20 years building a legacy that didn't outlive the next quarter, and 1 week watching you heal strangers with nothing but a second chance. I think I want my name to mean something more than profit margins. Eli nodded, slowly. It already does. Just then, a nurse passed by carrying a tray of donated books. One slipped off the top and hit the ground. Nathan bent to pick it up. The cover read, "The Things We Leave Behind, the Things We Carry Forward." He handed it back, but the title stayed in his mind. Maybe he couldn't go back and change the past, but maybe, just maybe, he could carry something forward that actually mattered. 1 week later, Nathan returned to the clinic, not with a check, not for therapy but to help. He arrived early, wearing jeans and a plain button-up, the kind of clothes that didn't shout power or title. Just person. Ia had helped rearrange his schedule again. This time, there were no excuses. He told the board he was on site for a philanthropic initiative. It wasn't a lie, just incomplete. The front desk nurse blinked when she saw him. "Didn't think we'd see you again so soon. I thought I'd offer a few hours," Nathan replied. "Even if it's just filing or taking out trash." She smiled. "Well, we do have a room in the back that could use sorting. No one's touched it in years." It turned out to be a dusty storage space, boxes stacked from floor to ceiling, mismatched chairs, unopened donations, half-working printers. But Nathan didn't complain. He rolled up his sleeves, tied back his sleeves with rubber bands, and got to work. Hours passed. As he cleared a corner of the room, he found an old corkboard leaning against the wall. Faded Polaroids, sticky notes, and hand-drawn cards filled its surface. At the center was a photograph, a young man in a medical coat, smiling awkwardly next to a shelter's front door. Eli. Below the photo was a child's crayon drawing, 2 stick figures, one with a stethoscope, one with a big frown. That eventually turned into a smile, scrawled underneath in messy handwriting. "Dr. E. made my mum smile again." Nathan stared at it, unable to look away. He sat on an overturned box and let himself feel something. He usually ran from stillness. There was no applause here, no recognition, and yet, this room held more meaning than any award wall he'd ever built. Eli stepped in later, wiping his hands on a towel. "You found the memory room," he said with a small smile. Nathan looked up. "Why isn't this out in the open?" Eli leaned against the doorframe. "Because it's not for everyone, just for us. The staff, the people who get it." Nathan nodded slowly. "I get it." Eli crossed the room and picked up a photo from the corkboard. "This woman," he said, "was turned away from 3 hospitals before she came here. No insurance. Stage 2 cancer. We couldn't save her body, but we saved her dignity. She died holding her son's hand, in a real bed, with music playing. That was enough." Nathan felt something in his throat tighten. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Later that afternoon, as he was leaving, he noticed a new sign being painted above a recently cleared wing of the clinic. It read, "The Room for Second Chances." The name wasn't his idea, but he had funded it, and it fit, because that's what this place was. Not a clinic, not a charity, a sanctuary, for anyone who had fallen and dared to rise again. Before he stepped outside, he turned to Eli. "Thank you," he said quietly. Eli looked surprised. "For what?" "For not letting me stay the person I was." Eli smiled. "You did that part yourself." The week passed, and Nathan found himself returning to the clinic more than he ever thought he would. Not as a benefactor, not even as a patient. Just Nathan. He helped where he could, stocking supplies, reading to patients in the waiting area, quietly learning how this world worked without the pressure of knowing everything. Mia, loyal as ever, covered for him when the board asked too many questions. "This is personal," she'd say, and that was enough for now. But healing is rarely a straight line. On a rainy Thursday, as Nathan was organizing a shipment of donated hygiene kits, the front door buzzed. A new patient entered, soaked and limping. His coat was torn, and a scar ran across his temple. He looked maybe 40, but hard living had aged him, and when he locked eyes with Nathan, the air shifted. "Caldwell?" the man asked, blinking. In disbelief, Nathan froze. He hadn't heard that voice in years. "Mason Jennings." Nathan said the name like it tasted bitter. "What are you doing here?" Mason gave a dry laugh. "Was about to ask you the same thing. Thought you'd be in a penthouse, not handing out band-aids." They had history, ugly history. Mason had once been his CFO, a fast-talking risk-taker who'd nearly sunk the company in a failed offshore investment. Nathan had fired him in a very public and very final boardroom showdown. "Look," Mason muttered, suddenly embarrassed. "I'm not here for trouble. I've been sleeping in my car. Got this infection in my leg. Someone said this place doesn't ask too many questions." Eli appeared at that moment, clipboard in hand. "You'll be treated like anyone else here, Mr. Jennings. That's our promise." Mason raised an eyebrow. "You, the doc." "I'm the director," Eli said, gently but firmly. "Come on, let's get you seen." Nathan stood rooted as Mason disappeared down the hallway. Eli turned to him. "You okay?" He forced a nod. "Yeah, just surprised." Eli studied him for a beat. "You want to walk away?" Nathan thought about it. Part of him wanted to, but something stopped him. "No," he said, "not this time." He didn't leave. Instead, he walked into the supply room and started unpacking gloves, box by box, hand by hand, like he was working something out of himself. Later that evening, as the clinic was closing, Mason reappeared with a bandaged leg and a paper bag of antibiotics. He hesitated before speaking. "Listen, I messed up, Caldwell. Back then, I thought I could outsmart everyone, and I lost everything. My job, my family. I've been running ever since." Nathan stared at him. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I don't think I ever said sorry, not properly." The word hung there. Sorry, not a magic fix, but a start. Nathan didn't reply at first, but he nodded. "Just once. Don't waste the second chance, Mason. You only get so many." As Mason walked into the rain, Nathan realized something. This place wasn't just healing him. It was healing how he saw others, even the ones who'd hurt him. That night, he stayed late, helping mop the hallway. No one asked him to. He just did it, and for the first time in years, his reflection in the clinic's glass doors didn't look like a stranger. It looked like a man slowly remembering who he used to be and who he still could become by early spring. Nathan's office looked different. Not just in decor, though softer tones had replaced cold grays. And there was now a painting of a family hugging near the window, but in how it felt. The space no longer buzzed with fear or urgency. It had softened, it had breathed, and in that, so had Nathan. He hadn't tried to rebuild the CEO throne. Instead, he focused on becoming what he now called a steward. His energy wasn't in profit margins, but in building bridges within the company and beyond. He launched an outreach initiative, with Dr. Eli Monroe's guidance, aimed at supporting homeless healthcare professionals looking to re-enter the field. Their first candidate, a former pharmacist named Shelley, who'd been living in a shelter for 6 months. The day Shelley received her provisional license and a new position in the company's outpatient division, she broke down in tears, and Nathan, standing beside her, simply nodded. He didn't say, "I know how that feels." He didn't need to. He just offered his hand, and she took it. Nathan also kept attending therapy, though he no longer arrived in denial or silence. Now, he showed up open, willing. Some sessions were quiet, others raw, but he stayed. That mattered most, and he spoke to Eli weekly, not about emergencies anymore, about books they were reading, podcasts, how to improve patient empathy. It amazed him how someone who'd once lived under a bridge had now become his anchor. One afternoon, Nathan found himself back in the same boardroom where he'd fainted all those months ago. This time, he was preparing for a presentation not to investors, but to local medical students. The topic, leadership and compassion. When he walked to the podium, he felt his hands tremble slightly, not from anxiety, from the weight of truth. "I used to think success was about power," he began, voice low, "about never showing weakness, but it turns out, the bravest thing I've ever done was letting someone help me, and that someone was a doctor who'd once been homeless." The room hushed. Leaning in, he reminded me that humanity is not a liability, it's our greatest asset, and healing. It doesn't always start in a hospital. Sometimes, it starts with being seen. Applause rose, not the kind meant for performance, but the quiet, respectful kind meant for honesty. Afterward, a young med student approached him, eyes wet. "My dad was on the streets for 5 years before we found him again," she whispered. "Hearing your story, it made me feel less alone." Nathan smiled, gently resting a hand on her shoulder. "You're not," and he meant it. 2 weeks later, Nathan stood at the hospital rooftop, the skyline stretching in front of him like a quiet ocean. The wind tugged gently at his coat, and beside him stood Dr. Eli Monroe, not in scrubs, not as a doctor on shift, but simply as a man, arms folded, eyes thoughtful. "I used to come up here when I was in med school," Eli said, voice quiet. It was the only place that felt quiet enough to breathe. Nathan looked over at him, the corners of his mouth lifting slightly. "And now you're one of the people holding it all together." Eli chuckled, then grew serious. "Nathan, I never said thank you for listening, for not just seeing a file, for seeing me." But Nathan shook his head. "You gave me back something I didn't know I lost. My humility, my ability to feel again. You reminded me that we don't always climb to rise above others. Sometimes we climb just to reach the people we left behind." Eli's eyes shimmered with something unspoken. That afternoon, Nathan stood in front of his entire staff during an internal town hall. His speech had none of the corporate polish they were used to. It was raw, almost trembling. "I collapsed in front of you weeks ago, and I know many of you were scared," he began. "The truth is, I wasn't just physically unwell. I was empty, hollowed out by years of tunnel vision, chasing numbers, ignoring names." He paused, looking directly at several young interns in the front row. "I forgot that healthcare isn't just a business. It's people, it's pain, it's second chances." There was a silence, then a single clap, then more, until the entire room stood. Later, Nathan invited Eli to co-lead a new initiative, a program aimed at recruiting and retraining individuals with backgrounds of hardship, including homelessness, for medical support roles. They called it Back to Life. For the first time in years, Nathan walked into his office and sat down not to check the market, but to write a letter, a handwritten one, to his estranged daughter. "I don't expect forgiveness," it began, "but I want you to know. I fainted once, and woke up not to shame, but to grace. And now I'm finally learning to be the kind of man who deserves to be called Dad again." The letter was never returned, but 2 weeks later, a small envelope arrived. Inside it was a single photo, Nathan's daughter, with her newborn. A note on the back said simply, "Meet Grace. She's named after what you found." Nathan didn't cry often, but that night he did. In a city filled with headlines, quarterly reports, and boardroom noise, one man had fainted, and in doing so, had awakened to the life he was always meant to live. If this story moved you, if it made you pause and reflect, let us know in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe, because sometimes, the stories that stay with us the longest are the ones we never saw coming.